Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we're covering La Vita è Bella, Life is Beautiful, a 1997 movie directed by Roberto Benigni, written by Roberto Benigni and Vincenzo Cerami. It's the second highest grossing foreign language film in the US, after Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and one of the highest grossing non-English language movies of all time. And many people will have seen it, but if you haven't, it's sort of a tragic comedy about a Jewish-Italian family that is set during the Holocaust. Mart, what did you think of this movie?
I love this movie. I was one of those people who had not seen it, and you didn't know I hadn't seen it. So we had a funny conversation about this. But I love this movie. It took me completely by surprise. Super funny, and the fact that it's so funny makes it extra sad. It's really good. I really enjoyed it. How about you?
Yeah, so as we were talking about offline, I had seen this movie in university. I took a course called Fascism on Film, which I'm pretty sure I've mentioned before. And this was one of the movies we watched. And just, yeah, I agree. The thing that makes it so sad and poignant is partially because there are parts of it that are so funny. And I really enjoyed it. I recommend it to anybody who, is looking for something to watch about World War II. And when you said you hadn't seen it, we were halfway through, and I was like, oh no, I haven't warned her about the ending. It gets sad.
It gets so dark and so sad. I want to ask you one thing. I want to ask what you learned about it in university. You remember? There was anything?
Well, this would have been in like 2008, so it was a little while ago. And I remember it specifically because obviously in that class we watched a lot of things that were very dark. We watched Solo, which is quite famous. It's been banned in a few countries, and we watched, I can't remember what it's called. It's this movie with Gerard Depardieu, and it's also really dark about fascism in Italy during World War II. And yeah, so this was the one movie where there was like, I guess, sort of a bright spot where there were funny elements to it. And I just remember learning that the director, Roberto Benigni, was sort of a mentee of the famous director, Federico Fellini. And so he kind of borrowed some style elements from him, but we'll probably talk more about that a little bit later.
Cool. Let's get into the movie. Shall I start this one?
Yeah, go for it.
It opens with a quote that says, "This is a simple story, but not an easy one to tell. Like a fable, there is sorrow, and like a fable, it is full of wonder and happiness." I think this would sum up the movie really well, actually. So, good opening.
Yeah, the clip they play during the opening too, at first you don't really recognize it because it's very dark and sort of misty, but we'll circle back to it later. And when you recognize what the beginning clip is from, it's very sobering. So we open in Arezzo, Italy in 1939. Our main character is Guido Orefice, played by Roberto Benigni. And he's in the car with his friend Ferruccio, played by Sergio Bustrick. And they're driving down a mountain, and immediately it's funny. They're going back and forth. They're being silly. The brakes don't work, and they end up sailing down the mountain and right through a parade meant for the king. And Guido's waving at people to get out of the way, but he's accidentally doing the fascist salute, so everybody's just saluting back at him. It's a very funny intro to a movie.
I was dying during this. I was like, I really didn't know. I had not seen like a trailer, or I hadn't read anything about it, so I didn't really know it was a comedy. So this was a nice surprise.
Yeah, I think it's so the director Roberto Benigni also plays the main character, of course, and so much of this movie rests on his sense of comic timing and his innate charm. And just, he really carries a lot of the scenes that he's in, but everyone else is very funny as well.
Yeah, it made me laugh when they just passed on the king in his beautiful car. The tiny king just arrived to this group of people paying him no mind.
Yes, very good. Of course, they have to stop and repair the car because the brakes aren't working. And Guido, who always wants to go over and chat with people and find out their life story, goes over to talk with this little girl who's working on the farm. And then a woman falls out of a hayloft and into his arms. And that's our introduction to Dora, or Principessa, as he called her, played by Nicoletta Braschi, who is actually Roberto Benigni's real life wife.
Really? That's cool. And I now get the reference in the Princess Diaries too. because that's obviously from this. And I never made the link because I hadn't seen the movie, so now I understand. Guido and his friend Fabrizio go to stay at his uncle's place, Alicia, so that Fabrizio can start his new job as an upholsterer, and Guido can work at his uncle's restaurant as a waiter, which will come in handy later for him. And there's this ongoing bit between Guido and Fabrizio's boss, where he's trying to steal his hat, but they're also having a bit of a conversation, and it's the first time we kind of get a glimpse of the political climate, because Guido's trying to figure out this boss's political background or affiliation, I guess, and he doesn't say so outright what his political leanings are, but then he turns around to face his kids, who are called Adolfo and Benito. And there's something so funny about the delivery that it got me, and I just started laughing. I couldn't stop for a good 5 minutes.
Yes, it's very funny. The comic timing is so quick that it's unexpected and you laugh.
I guess if you would be a young person, you might not get the Benito reference, but you definitely get the Adolfo one.
And his uncle Alicio is played by Justino Durano, and he is perpetually a little disappointed in Guido, but generally speaking, a good little background character.
So Guido tries to get a loan to open a bookstore, which is his dream, but the government official Rodolfo, played by Amerigo Fontani, brushes him off. Guido ultimately makes a terrible first impression, and there's a bit with eggs in this scene that's really funny, but that comes back later as well. But Rodolfo is trying to chase him, so he has to steal a bike. And he bikes into Dora again. So they meet accidentally for the second time.
Yeah, a huge part of the bits in this movie rely on information that has previously been set up. And so he ends up making this terrible impression on Rodolfo, because in the prior scene where he had met Dora for the first time, she had given him some eggs for catching her when she fell out of the hayloft. So he had these eggs in his pocket still. And so he makes this impression on Rodolfo. He hides the eggs under his hat when he's like stolen his hat. And then Rodolfo takes the hat back and goes to put it on, and it's full of eggs. So all throughout this movie, you have to be watching everything that's happening, because it will definitely feed into a bit later.
Yes. It's cleverly written in that way too. You don't realize how well it's written until you get to the next bit that connects to the first bit. It's so smart.
Yeah. Normally, when I write notes about the plot of a movie for this podcast, I go pretty high level and then I go back in after and add details. But in this movie, it was like, well, if I don't remember to add a certain detail now, it's probably going to come back later. It's been a long time since I've seen this movie, so I was having to make a note of everything.
Yeah, everything is important almost, which is kind of nice, really, because I feel like nothing is superficial in this movie. It's really smart.
Exactly. Everything. Chekhov's eggs.
Yeah. So there's also a scene where we get to kind of see Guido as a waiter, and he's just kind of showing all the stuff he knows, and his comedic timing is so amazing. I don't know. It almost seems like it's improvised. I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel like not all of this would have been scripted.
No, I agree. And I do think there is an English dub, but you have to watch it in the original Italian. There's really something about watching Roberto Benigni just chew the scenery and probably, you're right, make things up, and the actors around him just have to react.
After we meet him as a waiter, we see him later with his friend, Ferruccio, lying in bed, and they're talking about Schopenhauer, who has a theory that if you think about something hard enough, it will happen. And this is very important for the rest of the story.
Yeah, this is like the original manifesting. So it's played for comedy for sure at this point.
Yeah.
So Guido meets Dora again in the town square by accident, but he also meets Rodolfo, the guy who turned him down for a bank loan and chased him away on a bike. And unfortunately, Rodolfo turns out to be Dora's boyfriend, because nothing in this movie is unconnected. Guido hides from Dora's boyfriend, and then when he's gone, he tries to ask her out, but she says she likes it when they meet by surprise. And she does genuinely seem to be charmed by him.
Yeah, it's not like in a stalkery kind of way.
Guido serves one of his customers at the restaurant is Dr. Lessing, played by Horst Buchholz. And this customer enjoys riddles. So he and Guido go back and forth, sort of telling each other riddles. Guido's very good at riddles, and Dr. Lessing is not so good, which frustrates him a little bit. And Guido also ends up serving an Italian official just in from Rome, who reveals that he's going to do an inspection at the school tomorrow morning, which stands out to Guido because he knows that Dora works at the school.
And so what he does is he goes to the school and impersonates the official. And then as he gets to the school, they inform him that he must give a speech about racial superiority. That's a difficult word. Help me with the word.
Racial superiority. Oh my goodness.
Thank you. I'll just leave that in for comedic effect there. But this is the first time you kind of really understand how dark things are. But he does it with flow. He talks about the Aryan race and how cool their belly buttons are, basically.
Yes, another very funny scene. And then, of course, he almost gets caught when the school official comes and he has to flee through the window. But he does manage to find out where Dora will be on the weekend. And so when the weekend rolls around, he goes to the theater and sees her. And she's sitting away up in a box with Rodolfo, but he's sitting down in, the cheap seats. And he tries to use his Schopenhauer manifestation tricks to get her attention. And the song that's playing is the Barcarolle by Jacques Offenbach, which will be important later. And then outside the theater, we see Rodolfo. And for the first time, we get a sense of Dora's personality when she's not surprised by meeting Guido. And so her boyfriend's trying to drag her to dinner at the prefect's house. She clearly doesn't want to go. This is clearly a part of a trend of things where Rodolfo's trying to drag her around because she's arm candy and she makes him look good. And they get outside and it's raining. So she sends Rodolfo to go fetch the car. And Guido pulls a bit of a fast one, because we've established that his friend Ferruccio's car actually looks just like Rodolfo's. So Guido takes it and pulls up in the rain, and she hops in thinking that it's Rodolfo's car.
This is kind of stalkery, a little bit stalkery, but it's so cute. Also, can I just mention the lady in the theater next to him? It's so funny.
It's very funny. His way of doing his quote unquote Schopenhauer method is he like waves his fingers like a witch, like spirit fingers. And he says like, look at me, my princess. Cause he calls Dora Principessa the whole movie. And the woman next to him definitely thinks that he's talking to her. It's very funny. There's no part of this movie that is not like unmined for comedy, I feel. This part where he pulls up and she hops into the wrong car. This was the one part where I was like, well, this didn't age super, super, super well.
Right, and she also doesn't notice for the first 3 minutes that she's in a car because she's just kind of complaining to Rodolfo, except it's not Rodolfo. So then she notices it's Guido and they have a little chat. But then they crash the car because we learn that Guido has only learned to drive as he's taking his car away.
Oh, they have a funny little exchange, which I love because it shows how funny Dora is. She says, when did you learn to drive? And he says, 10 minutes ago. And she's like, oh, I thought it was less long than that.
Yeah, she isn't afraid to give him a little bit of it. What am I trying to say? She isn't afraid to talk back at him, basically, which is cool.
And so this is another part where it really relies heavily on pre-established things. And so there's this, every time he's walking into town, Guido walks past this house where a man, some kind of like mechanic or something, will stop by a house and he'll look up at a window and he'll say, Mary, the key. And then a woman throws a key out the window. And there's, earlier in the movie, we've established Dr. Lessing likes riddles, and Guido had given him a riddle for which the answer is 7 seconds. And then we have the bit where he's always trying to steal Ferruccio's boss's hat. And so all of these come in to make like this really cute, like he's walking home with Dora and all these like really cute things keep happening that seem a bit magical. And so she says, well, I'll only go out with you if there's a sign from heaven. And so they're walking past this house where the woman throws the key out the window. And he's like, let me see if I can get the key to your heart from heaven. And then he says, Mary, the key. And of course, the key comes sailing out the window. And he says they're talking about, when they're going to go on a date. And then the doctor walks up to him to give him the answer to the riddle and says, 7 seconds. And then he says, oh, my hat's really wet. I hope I can get a new one. And she's like, let me try this time. So she prays to the heavens for him to get a new hat. And then the guy whose hat he stole comes over, takes his hat off and puts his old hat back on. So it's a very, very cute sort of magical bit.
Yeah. And it's really important to see this in action once because it becomes really important to Guido later on in the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. So we get our first sort of scene of Dora on her own, and she's at her house, and she really doesn't want to go to a party, but her mother makes her go. And the party happens to be at the restaurant where Guido works. So he's there and he sees her. And Rodolfo announces at the gathering that they are going to get married, which Dora does not want to do.
I know. There was something I found really charming and relatable about Dora being in her bed, in her party dress, just not wanting to get up out of bed. I was like, yep, that's me.
Yeah, it was really cute. There's a few sort of little bits and pieces of this scene too that become relevant later. There's his Guido's uncle Zalicio has a horse, and the horse gets covered in racist, anti-Semitic graffiti. Dr. Lessing leaves Guido with a new riddle because he happens to be there at the restaurant. And there's a group of school teachers, including Dora, but she's not obviously participating in the discussion. But they're talking about this racist math problem that's been given to them as part of the curriculum from the central fascist government in Rome. At first you think, they're saying that, oh no, this math problem is racist, but then it turns out their problem with it is that it's too hard for the kids to do. So they're constantly subverting expectations in this movie in a way that make you laugh.
This just made me so mad. Like, yeah, it's funny, but also they're just talking about like getting rid of all the sick people, getting rid of all the cripples, and I'm saying cripples because I'm crippled, by the way. I'm not just generally calling people cripples. But yeah, it's so off-putting the way they were talking about it. I hated that. But also, it's also very, very funny.
Yes, I think this movie does a good job of setting these sort of dark elements in place where you fully realize how dark and shocking they are, but they also manage to subvert them and make them funny at the expense of the people who are fascists. So Dora sees Guido tip a tray over. He's all bamboozled and upset because he has found out that she's getting married. And he gets down on the ground to clean it up. And she slips under the table and crawls over to him and kisses him and asks him to take her away. And he takes that very literally. And he returns a few minutes later on that horse, which, as you'll recall, is graffitied. It's painted bright green. It's covered in racist graffiti. And she climbs up over the table, hops onto it with him, and away they go. And they return to his home together.
The funny thing for me was that her boyfriend, I've suddenly forgotten his name, help me.
Rodolfo?
Rodolfo, he just looks at them leaving, very confused because he remembers Guido, but he can't really tell what from. And then he says, "It's the idiot with the eggs."
Yes, absolutely. Chekhov's eggs once again.
So we skip forward maybe 3 or 4 years, and we meet their kid, a very cute kid called Joshua. Is that right? Yeah, there we go. I'm sorry. Who's played by Giorgio Cantarini, and they also have a bookstore, so I guess his dream finally did come true. But we can tell that the situation is becoming worse for Jewish people because their store has been graffitied. It says something like Jewish arms store or something. And Guido has to explain to his son why there's a sign that says no Jews or dogs allowed, which he does in a very Guido manner. To be honest, I thought that was really cute.
Yeah, they're going along and he's talking about how, oh, you see this store up here? They don't allow llamas or Greek people. And this store up here doesn't allow cats or, English people. And he's just making all these things up and talking about, well, who shouldn't we allow at our house? And the kid's like, I don't like spiders. He's like, fine, we'll make a sign saying no spiders.
Yeah, it's really sweet. But then he's at the store with his son and he's called away to the prefect. And you can kind of tell that he's been through this before. It's not the first time he's been called away. But his son has to kind of mind the store, and his grandmother, played by Marisa Paredes, comes in. And she's never met him before, or he hasn't met her at least. And she says that she's gonna come over the following day, and this kind of confused me a little bit. But I think the idea is that maybe she wasn't a fan of Dora marrying Guido or something, and that's why they haven't been in contact.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that Dora's mother is not a fan of Guido, so she hasn't met the grandson before, but she seems to be in the mood to bury the hatchet.
Yeah, it seems kind of a little bit of a racist background thing, kind of.
Yeah, and actually, maybe we'll circle back to this, but now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if she called the police on Guido
We
and
know.
then made sure that Dora
Oh,
wasn't there.
and that's why she says, "I've got a surprise for you, to the son.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, I mean,
coming over tomorrow."
I don't know for sure because she probably wouldn't have known if like Josue would also get picked up, but now that I'm thinking about it.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't think about that either, but it is kind of coincidental, I guess, that she's just coming into the store when Guido isn't there. And she's also
Yeah.
talking about tomorrow, when obviously that's just the day that something's gonna happen to them.
Yeah.
It just kind of might be. I don't know. Maybe we're meant to
Theorizing.
not know.
So the next day, the family's getting ready for Dora's mother's visit. They never name her character, which is why I keep calling her Dora's mother. Dora leaves to pick her up, but as they're coming back, they come to the house and it's been ransacked, and Guido and Josue are not there and they've been taken away.
Yeah, so we find out that they're in the back of a truck, and Guido is telling his son this elaborate story about how this is all for his birthday and they're going on a trip, and he won't tell him where they're going because he doesn't actually know, but he's just pretending it's a surprise. And then the next thing you know, they're at the train station and they're being shepherded into this train. And Dora, who has found out obviously that where they've gone, goes to the train station and tries to bargain with the Nazi officer, who gives her no respite, basically. He says, "Go home, woman." But then she makes him put her on a train as well.
Yes. And this is sort of at the halfway point of the movie. And then after this, it gets considerably darker.
Yes, it does. And also, I thought it was really kind of Guido's just keeping up this story about how they're going on a train. And of course, there are no seats on the train. Have you never been on a train? You have to stand and it'll be really busy, but that's what trains are. And he's just making up this story for his son. And you can already tell that he's going to do that for the entire time from just that first kind of like introduction of that made up belief story.
Yeah, the train arrives at an unidentified concentration camp, and there the men and the women are separated. So Dora goes off one way, and Guido and Josue go off the other. And Guido sets up the experience as a game for Josue. So, oh, well, we're all waiting in line here because we're all so excited to get in, etc., that sort of thing. He says, look, if we follow the rules and we get 1,000 points, the first prize is a real tank. And we've already established that Josue has this little toy tank. He's really excited about tanks. When his grandma says he's going to get a birthday surprise, he's like, is it a tank? So this kid is absolutely jazzed at the opportunity to win a real live tank.
Yeah. And his uncle also gets sent into a different direction, too.
Yeah. And Guido explains that as, well, we're all on different teams. He's going to be on a different team. It's funny because there are people who have said that, this movie makes light of the situation, but I almost feel like the jokes make the sad parts more poignant because we know what's going on. And as the movie goes, you can tell that Guido knows what's really going on.
It's not meant to be like in your face obvious. It's meant to be this kind of, it's funny, but really, is it funny or is it just really, really sad?
The next scene is they're all ushered into these barracks, sort of where they'll be living. And the German officer comes in and asks if anyone speaks German. And Guido does not speak German, but he volunteers for the job because he wants to keep this bit going where Josue thinks that it's all a game. And so as the German officer is shouting the camp rules in German, Guido is, quote unquote, interpreting them as the rules of this game that he's made up. And it is a very funny scene because he's clearly saying things that the German officer is not saying. But then it pans over the faces of everyone else in the barracks, and you can tell that they're all just like, dude, what the fuck are you doing?
Exactly. And there's one other character. I don't think we've named him in our document, but what's his name? Next to them in the box.
Bartolomeo.
Right. Yes. So he does speak German apparently a little bit. So he understands that's what's being said. And he also knows Guido's full of shit. But it's funny, but also at this point you're like, oh god, does it mean that everyone who doesn't speak German in this room is gonna be in trouble for not knowing the rules of the actual camp?
Yeah, it's kind of really the first time too where Guido's typical brand of humor, which normally gets him in trouble in a bit of a sort of slapstick silly way, is now being transposed into this arena where the stakes are very high.
Yeah. Oh, as you said that, I remember the scene from earlier where the horse is painted in graffiti. He still also at that point believes that nothing is going to happen to him. He says that to his uncle. It's like, what's going to happen to me? I'll be fine. And now he's in this place where obviously that's no longer true.
Yes, he as a character understands, and we as the audience can see that he seems to walk in the light a little bit.
After the rules have been explained, Guido is assigned to do hard labor. He has to carry anvils around. I don't even quite know what for, to be honest.
I don't
What
know
are you
either.
making?
I almost wonder if that's, well, it's either it's make busy work, but I suspect that the movie is sort of making fun of this idea of hard labor. It's like, oh, well, they're just carrying anvils around. Because he
Yeah,
even
it's
makes a
just
joke about
heavy.
it.
Yeah.
He's like, what on earth do you need with this many anvils?
Dora obviously is not with them, but she is with all the other women, and she finds out as they're marching down a flight of stairs what happens to the children and old people in the camp, which is that they'll be sent to gas chambers. We'll see it later.
Yeah, and her friend explains to her that they tricked them by telling them that they're going to take a shower, and then it ends up being the gas chamber. And we sort of so there had been an earlier bit when they were getting ready for Josue's grandmother to come over that we find out that Josue hates baths. He doesn't want to take baths. So immediately you're like, I wonder how this is going to factor in. And sure enough, in the next scene, Josue comes to find Guido while he's doing his hard labor. And Guido's like, well, where are you supposed to be right now? And he's like, they're trying to make me take a shower, but I don't want to. And Guido's like, well, go take your shower. And he's like, no. And so, yeah,
God.
yeah. And unfortunately, poor Uncle Alicio is not so fortunate. They send him away. And yeah, that's a really poignant scene.
Yeah, it's also very poignant because in that same scene, a German officer or Nazi officer, probably a lady, trips and he helps her up. And I'm like, don't help her up. Don't be the good person.
I know it's that contrast between like what a good, kind person Alicio is and what a terrible person this woman is. It's sort of in the last few moments of his life. Yeah, it's something. Part of this too in the camp, none of the German officers have names. They're meant to be sort of interchangeably facelessly evil, I think. And I think that was done intentionally.
Yeah, I think so too. And in the scene where his uncle is being led up to the showers or the guest chambers, the voiceover overhead in that room saying, leave your clothes there and there because you'll get them back after your shower. And you just know as an audience, you just know you're never coming back. It's just so horrible. I don't think they knew at this point.
No, well, because even obviously Guido's telling Josue to go take a shower, like he doesn't know. We only know because Dora found out from her friend. Dora and the women end up sorting the clothes of those who were killed. So that's sort of a grim little end to that scene.
I was really afraid she was gonna find Guido's uncle's clothes, but they don't do that, I think. It's kind of dark to see her and all the other women do that. And it would have been like that.
And I think it's important too that we are getting Dora's perspective periodically because she's a realist. She doesn't live in this sort of magical world where he walks in the light. And so when we see things from her perspective, we're seeing things a bit more as they really are. And she understands how high the stakes are immediately.
Yeah, and they're also never comical from her scenes. They're just serious scenes. I think you need those in between as well. You can't all make it funny. But anyway, later on, Guido is sneaking his son back out of the factory in a wheelbarrow, and they stop at like an office space for a German, and there's a loudspeaker, and he steals it and kind of shouts, Buongiorno, Principessa, so that Dora can hear to let her know that they're okay, and you can then hear them running away from the Germans after.
Yes. In the next scene, Guido is examined along with a group of others by the camp doctor, who turns out to be Dr. Lessing, the big fan of riddles. And immediately Guido seems to think Dr. Lessing might be able to help him out. So the doctor requests Guido to be a waiter at this fancy dinner they're going to have at the camp with a bunch of the officers and their wives and their friends.
Dr. Lessing makes me angry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So his son wants to go home, but Guido talks him out of it by kind of letting him go home almost. Like, he's like, yeah, all right, we'll go. And then his son seems to have learned about the gas chambers And because someone said they're turning children into buttons and soap. It's really sad. But Guido, of course, tells him that's not true, and he makes up the story, and then they're still playing the game, and he's like, "Oh, but we're almost winning. But if you really want to go home, we can go home." And then he's out the door almost, and then of course Joshua doesn't want to go.
There's really no gut punch in the world like a child tearfully saying they make buttons and soap out of us.
It's just horrifying, isn't it?
At the fancy dinner where Guido's working as a waiter for Dr. Lessing, Josue is playing hide and seek with the German kids, and then the German nanny, I guess, mistakes him for one of the German kids. And so she takes him into the area where the dinner's being had, and for the first time, he gets some good eats. So he's sitting there with the other kids just eating food. And he knows that one of the rules, of course, is that he doesn't speak because he doesn't speak any German. And he accidentally says grazie at one point. And so the guy who's in charge of them is like, what's going on here? And he goes off to get the woman in charge to say, like, look, we have this weird kid. He's speaking Italian. But Guido sees this happening, of course, because he's working at the dinner. So he goes over immediately and teaches all the kids to say grazie. So when the man and the woman come back, all of the kids are going grazie, grazie. So he helps Josue narrowly avoid getting into trouble there.
Yeah, I almost thought in this scene when Guido's outside with Joshua telling him, like, don't speak, don't speak. Remember, you have to be quiet. I thought for a minute he was going to try and take him out of the camp in that way, like if they were going to keep him there. But then, of course, this kind of accident happens and it's not possible. But I do wonder what his intentions were there.
Well, I mean, I think the woman who was in charge of the children like saw Josue, so
Yeah,
they
he did.
didn't really have a choice. I think he had to kind of send him
Yeah.
away and hope for the best. And he's used to his typical walk in the light thing. So he's like, well, things will probably turn out for us.
Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting how, as you had said in that scene where poor Uncle Alicio is going to his death, he is very polite. He right up to the end, he's helping this woman up who's fallen down. And then in this case, Josue almost gets caught because he exhibits simple manners. He says thank you when he's a cookie or something like that. And so it's just more of this depiction of, these they're just being ordinary, polite, good people, and they're being treated in this way.
Yeah, it's horrible. But of course, we're still at this party and we see Dr. Lessing, and he's like, I've got to talk to you in a minute. I'll give you a sign about when. And you can tell that he's being kind of sneaky. So you have this one hopeful minute of thinking, all right, maybe he's going to get them out of there. And then when they finally do talk, you realize Dr. Lessing has his riddle from a friend that he cannot solve. And all he wants from Guido is his help to solve the riddle. And it broke my heart to see that.
Yeah. This is definitely the one point of the movie where you see it kind of fall apart behind Guido's eyes, where he doesn't have to act for his kid, and he's realizing that like they're really fucked, and he had put all this hope on this Dr. Lessing, and now it's not going to happen.
Yeah, he looks very disappointed and almost like disassociating at this point. He's just like, nope.
Guido is left alone with the music player for a minute at this party, and he puts on the barcarolle, which is the music that was playing when he saw Dora at the theater. And he sort of points it out the window so that Dora will be able to hear it across the camp. And then after dinner, he brings Josue back to the building where they sleep. And this is where we get the clip that was at the beginning of the movie where he's walking in the dark and the fog and he's carrying Josue. And now we realize what the clip is, because as they're walking through the dark, he encounters this huge, almost obscured, but you can tell what it is. It's a pile of corpses in the fog. And it almost sort of calls back to, those like medieval paintings of like Judgment Day and like Purgatory, where it's supposed to like frighten people with all the fire and brimstone. Yeah, it's almost like that. It's like not super realistic, but it really imbues you with this sense of horror.
Yeah, and it's even worse because just before that, he says to Joshua, maybe we're in a dream. Maybe mommy's going to wake us up with a latte and cookies. And that's really not a dream. It's a nightmare kind of thing. It kind of caught me off guard, to be honest, because it it was obviously already dark, but that scene in particular is like it's so subtle yet so dark.
Yeah, I think the horror and the darkness works especially well because it is part of this sort of pendulum swing, because there are the moments that are so funny and lighthearted, and then you sort of swing back towards the, you know, the reality of the situation. Chaos in the camp. The other prisoners believe the war is ending. All the Germans are running around and there's trucks going hither and yon. And Guido decides to hell with it. He's going to make a break for it. And he makes Josue hide in this little sort of, I don't even really know. It's like a utility cupboard or something.
Yeah, I thought it was, at first I thought it was like a safe, but it has a little peephole in there, so I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's like a little cupboard anyways. And he makes Josue hide in there while he disguises himself as a woman, and he goes over to the women's side of the camp to look for Dora. And he's heard that, you know, once people get in the trucks and the trucks take you away, the trucks don't come back. And so he finds this truck full of women. Dora's not in there, but he's yelling at them, you know, like, get out of the truck, get out of the truck. And he comes back to check on Josue. And then there's a few German officers and they have a dog. And the dog is barking away at this cupboard where Josue is hiding. And this is where Guido uses his supposed Schopenhauer skills. And before this, it's all been used as in support of the bit. But this is the one time in the movie where it's his last ditch attempt. This is his only way to save his son. And he, quote unquote, tries to use it for real. And then the dog ends up losing interest and walking off. And, you know, then Josue is safe. We, as the audience, breathe a collective sigh of relief, because just this once, you know, the magic was real.
And Guido has told Josue to not get out of the cupboard till everything is quiet. So he's not allowed to get out of there. And unfortunately, Guido is seen by a German officer, and he's being kind of marched away with like a gun to his back. And Josue sees him from his hiding spot, and he makes his final, spoilers, his final crazy wink at him, and he thinks everything's okay, and he marches away in a funny manner. And then the officer takes him into another space we can't see, and a shot off camera. And this kind of shut me up for the rest of the movie. I just wasn't able to smile anymore. Because for a second you think maybe he's okay. But obviously he's not. But he has saved his son, because Josue stays in his little hiding spot until the camp is very quiet. And then he emerges from the hiding spot, and there's an American tank that rolls up with a very American officer in it. But it's his prize, as promised, so he's very happy to see the tank.
Yes, it's very, I feel like the way, even just the way that scene looks, he comes out of his hiding spot and it's so quiet and empty, and it's this huge cavernous courtyard. And then you hear this like rumble in the ground, and the tank comes around the corner, and the kid is jazzed to see this tank. Like it breaks your heart a little bit, because you know what just happened to his dad.
Yeah, and he doesn't know. He won't find out in our movie, because he gets to ride the tank and he's very happy, and the American soldier gives him like his helmet, and he's like on top of the tank, and they're kind of tanking along, I would say, down up the mountain or down the mountain alongside all these prisoners. And then he sees his mother. They are reunited, which is bittersweet ending, I think, because we don't get to see their reaction to knowing Guido's not alive anymore. So it's kind of a little bit of a happy ending, at least for our two other characters.
And we get a voiceover from adult Josue saying, "This was my father's gift to me." So we know that he gets to survive and grow up, and there's, you know, that aspect of it too.
Yes, that's the end of the movie. I can't believe I'd never seen this one before.
Yeah, it came out in the 90s, obviously, and there was some controversy about it when it came out. There were some Jewish groups and some various people who thought that it trivialized the Holocaust. And Roberto Benigni, of course, is not Jewish, and he's a comedian. He was already well known in Italy, and then this movie sort of made him well known throughout the world. And yeah, so some people sort of took issue with that depiction.
Which I get it, because it's such a comedy as well as a tragedy. I can imagine if that's in your history, that you could feel like that wasn't as funny as the movie is, basically. But for
Yeah.
me, as someone without that history, it hit harder than it would have if it had not also been that funny.
Yeah, and there's a few pieces to this. First of all, Benini had said that he included historical inaccuracies on purpose because he wanted to set this one step apart from the actual Holocaust. We're supposed to understand that this is fiction, it's not a documentary. And there are little bits and pieces of the movie where that becomes very clear. And so sort of the style of the movie, I feel like serves the story very well. And I laughed too because I had seen there was an interview that someone had done with Mel Brooks, the famous director, and he is Jewish, of course. And he just ripped into this movie talking about, how there's some things you should never portray as a comedy and this and that. The reason why it cracked me up is because this is the man who made Blazing Saddles. And I was like, okay, so it's fine to make a comedy about racism in the Reconstruction era South, but the Holocaust is unportrayable. Like, to me, it's like, it's part of this broader conversation of, are there things that we just never portray, or is there a way to portray everything if you do it the right way?
Yeah, I don't think I have the answer to that, but you're not asking me for it, I know. But I thought it was a good movie, and I think I'll do some reading too about Italy because I don't know enough about World War II and Italy. So for
Yeah,
me,
I did a little bit of reading on this. So the place where they're from, Arezzo, is a little bit north of Rome, and all the buildings were heavily damaged during World War II. And the Germans actually made a bloody sort of last stand in front of Arezzo early in July 1944, and then the British and New Zealand troops liberated the town on the 16th of July. And Italy itself began in 1938 to enact these racist segregationist policies about Jewish people that stripped a lot of their rights. But in terms of, like, comparatively speaking, compared to Nazi Germany, Italy was not as bad for a couple of years. And they didn't actually start deporting and murdering Jewish citizens until the Italians surrendered to the Allies in September of 1943. And that's when the Allies occupied the southern part of Italy, but the Nazis, the Germans, still occupied the north and central parts of it. And so once the Nazis took over, that's when the Holocaust really began in earnest in Italy. And there were concentration camps in Italy itself, but most were sort of police and transit camps. They would hold people there on their way to somewhere else. And most Italian Jews ended up being deported to Auschwitz, unfortunately.
right. So this concentration camp we're seeing in Italy, not based on an actual concentration camp in Italy.
Well, because the camp is being run by the Germans, I wonder if we're meant to believe that they've gone to Germany. I mean, we don't really have any indication of how long the train ride was or anything like that. And like most of this, it's not really specific in time and place. So, but yeah, I mean, Auschwitz was not actually liberated by the Americans, but this might be one of those historical inaccuracies that Benini included just to sort of set it apart.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this film is also partially inspired by a book called In the End, I Beat Hitler by Rubino Romeo Salmoni. But I had a look for it and it doesn't seem to be widely available. There's not an English translation that I could find. But it was also partly inspired by Benini's father, who spent 2 years in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp during World War II. And it wasn't because he was Jewish. It was because after the armistice with the Allies, there were 650,000 Italian soldiers who were asked to continue to fight for the Axis, for Nazi Germany, and they refused. And so the Axis stripped them of their weapons, imprisoned them, and made them do hard labor. And they were classified as, quote unquote, Italian military internees instead of prisoners of war, which meant, of course, that the Geneva Conventions did not apply and the Red Cross and other international organizations were not allowed access. And so it sounds like they did not have a very good time.
Right. It sounds kind of like the Japanese prisoner of war camps, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just another way of not being decent to people that the Germans have created here with these Italians.
Yeah, but partly I think because the Holocaust didn't really begin in earnest until the Nazis occupied Italy in 1943. And partly because of that, there were, I think, a good percentage of Italian Jews managed to escape being rounded up, which is not to say that nobody did. And all the loss of life was, of course, awful and tragic. But it just wasn't on the same scale that it was in Germany. And yeah, I don't know. I just thought this is, an interesting movie because I feel like we don't usually see the Holocaust from the Italian perspective.
No, true. I find it really interesting to see. And also, I just thought it was a good movie. So, with that in mind, maybe we should get to the rating.
Sure. So we decided that we are going to rate this movie based on what Guido always says when he sees his wife, which is "Buongiorno, principessa," and you have to say it like that; it's mandatory. So, how many "Buongiorno, principessas" out of 10 would you rate this movie?
I would rate this movie 8.5 Buongiorno Principessa. And I'm giving it that many because I think it's one of my favorite movies I've seen since doing this podcast. I just thought if you told me beforehand that I was going to watch a comedic World War II movie, I would not have thought it would have been this good. But there's just something about having a comedy with incredibly sad moments that just made it all that more impactful for me, so that's why I'm giving it an 8.5. How about you?
Yeah, this movie really stuck with me. I saw it for the first time a long time ago, 16 years ago or so. And yeah, I still think about it sometimes. It's one of those, and watching it again, I was again struck by how tight the writing is, how everything that's introduced, like no thing is too small to be used again later in a bit. And it's really smart. And Benigni is never not on. His comedy, his humor really carries the movie. And all the supporting actors, really play into the bits really well. And also, I mean, obviously, it has these broad overarching themes. The movie has a lot to say. And coming from the perspective of our podcast, we're always talking about how it's nice to see different perspectives. So we're getting the civilian perspective. We're finding out a little more about Italy during World War II, even though it is not 100% historically accurate by any means. Obviously, the real Holocaust was a lot darker and bloodier and grimmer than it's depicted in this movie. But that's not really the point, right? It's not meant to be a documentary. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I definitely think it's worth a watch. You'll be surprised at the fact that you will laugh and cry pretty much in equal measure. And yeah, I really liked it. I'm going to give it a 9 Buongiorno Principessas out of 10.
Amazing. I think I'll definitely watch it again. It's unfortunately not on any of my streaming services. So I rented this one, but I think I'm gonna buy it.
Yeah, it's super worthwhile. And again, you definitely have to watch it in Italian with subtitles. It's just
Yes.
The English dub is not the same.
No, don't watch the dub. Don't be a loser. Watch the original language.
But this movie won a bunch of Academy Awards too, right? Like I believe it won, I want to say, I should have written this down, but I think it might have won Best Picture in the year that it was made. Like it was very successful internationally.
Even though I hadn't seen this movie before, I remember the Italian title being in the Dutch media often around that time. So it's definitely also a popular movie here. I just never seen it.
Well, thank you once again for listening to our podcast. We've had a good time. Hopefully you had a good time. You can follow us wherever you get your podcasts and give us 5 stars. That would be super helpful. You can also visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast.
What are we doing next week?
So next week we are going to do The Great Escape.
Cool. And what are you reading, Sam?
I am reading a book called The Stones of Burren Bay by Emily DeAngelis. It is a novel about a teenager who loses her father and grandmother in a short span of time. And it's sort of about her journey as an artist after that. And it takes place at a spot where I go camping every summer. That's pretty near and dear to me. And the author is actually a friend of my aunt's. So I have a signed copy and everything. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. It's a little bit of YA. It's a little lighter than the stuff that I usually read, but yeah, I'm enjoying it. What about you? Are you reading anything?
I'm not reading anything, but I am preparing for my trip to England to go to We Are Brace Fest.
We're very excited. I am super stoked for you that you're going to get to see all these fun historical panels and stuff.
Yeah, I'm kind of struggling to pick from all the good stuff. There's like too many good things going on at once. I'm like, I want to see this one and I want to see this one, but they're at the same time. So what do I do? But yeah, so we'll see you next week.
Bye bye.